The East India Company was formed in 1600 to trade in the Indian Ocean region with the Mughal India and the East Indies. The company ended up seizing control of large parts of the Indian subcontinent. Few could have predicted that 259 years later, the company would pass control of a subcontinent to the British Crown. The British East India Company set up trading posts in India to trade in textiles and spices for the home market. As their influence grew, they fought a number of battles with the Indians and the French to secure hegemonic power over the subcontinent. This culminated with a British victory at the Battle of Plassey in 1757, which secured the company's monopoly over India. Fast forward 100 years, and discontent is growing with taxes arising and land rights being denied to wandering tribes who turned to banditry in protest. Land meant for mosques and temples was being taken for churches, and native people were concerned, rightly, that the British meant to convert them to Christianity. Interestingly, as British power increased, so did segregation between the British and the natives. The growing oppression is the backdrop over which the events of 1857 began. In 1857, a large part of the Indian Army rebelled against the British authorities. The ensuing bloodshed sent shockwaves throughout the colonial Britain. To regard the rebellion merely as a Sepoy mutiny is to underestimate the root causes leading to it. British paramountcy, that is the belief in the British dominance in Indian political, economic and cultural life, had been introduced in India in about 1820. The British increasingly used a variety of tactics to usurp control of the Hindu princely states that were under what called the subsidiary alliances with the British. Everywhere, the old Indian aristocracy was being replaced by the British officials. One notable British technique was called the Doctrine of Lapse, first executed by Lord Dalhousie in the late 1840s. It involved the British prohibiting a Hindu ruler without a natural heir from adopting a successor, and after the ruler died or abdicated, annexing his land. Another serious concern was the increasing pace of westernization, by which Hindu society was being affected by the introduction of Western ideas. Missionaries were challenging the religious beliefs of the Hindus. During his tenure as Governor General of India from 1848 to 1856, Lord Dalhousie made efforts toward emancipating women and had introduced a bill to remove all legal obstacles to the remarriage of Hindu widows. There was a widespread belief that the British aimed at breaking down the caste system. The introduction of the Western methods of education was a direct challenge to orthodoxy, both Hindu and Muslim. The mutiny broke out in the Bengal army because it was only in the military sphere that the Indians were organized. This is the Enfield P-53 rifle, and to load it, the sepoys had to bite off the ends of lubricated cartridges to release the bullet and the gunpowder. The problem was that the grease used to lubricate the cartridges was a mixture of pigs and cows' lard. Thus, to have oral contact with it was an insult to both Muslims and Hindus. The perception that the cartridges were tainted added to the larger suspicion that the British were trying to undermine Indian traditional society. For their part, the British did not pay enough attention to the growing level of sepoy discontent. The Rebellion. In late March 1857, a sepoy named Mangal Pandey attacked the British officers at the military garrison in Barakpur. He was arrested and then executed by the British in early April. Later in April, sepoy troopers at Meerut refused their Enfield cartridges, and as punishment they were given long prison terms, fettered and put in jail. This punishment incensed their comrades, who rose on May 10th, shot the British officers and marched to Delhi, where there were no European troops. There, the local sepoy garrison joined the Meerut men, and by nightfall, the aged pen Bahadur Shah Zafar II had been nominally restored to power by tumultuous soldiery. The seizure of Delhi provided a focus and set the pattern for the whole mutiny, which then spread throughout the northern India. From the time of mutineers' seizure of Delhi, the British operations to suppress the mutiny were divided into three parts. First came the desperate struggles at Delhi, Kanpur and Lucknow during the summer. Then the operations around Lucknow in the winter of 1857 and 1858, directed by Sir Colin Campbell, and finally the mopping up campaigns of Sir Hugh Rose in early 1858. Peace was officially declared on July 8, 1859.
Regardless of being a failure, the Sepoy Mutiny did not go in vain. The rebellion led to a few tangible outcomes. The first and most important political impact of the rebellion was the reorganization of the British government in India and the diminished power of the East Indian Company. Parliament passed the Government of India Act in 1858, instituting a Minister of the Crown and a governing council in India designed to handle affairs more smoothly. The British government took over direct control of India and appointed a viceroy who would rule India on behalf of the British king, which officially made India part of the British colonies. This launched a more immediate government control which helped eliminate the previous commercialistic ways the East India Company used to govern the nation. The second one was the Queen's Proclamation in 1858, which promised 1. The government services irrespective of caste and religion and solely based on merits, and 2. Relinquished territorial expansion and guaranteed ownership of land rights and honor of local landlords, provided they cooperate with the British. Another significant result of the Sepoy Rebellion was the beginning of the policy of consulting with the Indians about how to run the country. The previous Legislative Council only consisted of Europeans, which induced a lack of communication and created a cultural gap. The new council allowed Indians to be nominated, which helped overcome the cultural gap and made the council more localized. Minor impacts of the rebellion include how the traditional structure of the Indian society began to cease and was eventually replaced by a westernized class system. This provoked a strong feeling of patriotism among the newly emerged middle class. 2. The development of educational systems. 3. The development of public service schemes like constructing roads and railways and making irrigation systems. 4. How the military was redeployed and more British soldiers were added to the troops in order to prevent future uprisings and to toughen the British rule over the nation. And lastly, how the revolt not only had the armed forces participating but also had the peasants in India join them, meaning people from two different classes, the peasants being from the lower class and the soldiers from a higher class, to fight together, which was something unfamiliar but was embraced by everyone. This further contributed to the people's feeling of nationalism.
From 1857 was that caution must prevail. Indian traditions must be respected, and the assumed guardians of these traditions, who are priests, princes, or landholders, were to be conciliated under firm British rule. Even though there was a lot of positive changes the British made after the Mutiny of 1857, there were also many negative effects that included the increase of racial animosity, introduction of the divide and rule policy, increase in the systematic economic loot of India, and the abolition of the Mughal dynasty once and for all. To begin with, Queen Victoria's 1858 promise of racial equality of opportunity in the selection of civil servants for the government of India had theoretically thrown the ICS open to qualified Indians, but examinations for the services were given only in Britain and only to male applicants between the ages of 17 and 22. Who could stay in the saddle over a rigorous series of hurdles. It is hardly surprising, therefore, that by 1869, only one Indian candidate had managed to clear those obstacles to win a coveted admission to the ICS. British royal promises of equality were thus subverted in actual implementation by jealous, fearful bureaucrats posted on the spot. The second negative impact would be the effect of the mutiny on the people of India themselves. Traditional society had made its protest against the incoming alien influences, and it had failed. The princes and other natural leaders had either held aloof from the mutiny or had proved, for most part, to be incompetent. From this time, all serious hope of a revival of the past or an exclusion of the West diminished. The traditional structure of Indian society began to break down and was eventually superseded by a westernized class system. The third impact would be the abolition of the Mughal Empire. Bahadur Shah Zafar or Bahadur Shah II was the last Mughal emperor. He was the second son of Akbar II, who became the successor to his father upon his death on 28 September 1837. Following his involvement in the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British exiled him to Rangoon, a British-controlled Burma, after convicting him on several charges. As an emperor, Zafar did not command an army, but he became the symbolic head of a revolution which united both Muslims and Hindus. Historians point out that thousands of soldiers from both religions came together to rebel against their British officers in support of restoring Mughal rule. At a time when nationalism and fundamentalism are on the rise, historians say Zafar's religious tolerance remains relevant to this day. He may have lost his title and dynasty, but he succeeded in conquering hearts and lives as a Sufi saint and mystical poet. Though trade with India had been highly valued by Europeans since ancient times, the long route between them was subject to many potential obstacles, from middlemen making trade unsafe, unreliable, and expensive. This was especially true after the collapse of the Mongol Empire and the rise of the Ottoman Empire. The horrific scale of the famines of the 1880s and the 1890s showed how limited any economic growth had been after the rebellion, which portrays the severity of the economic situation and the extent of how the people suffered.